So you've finished assignment 1, I'm hoping, and immediately launching yourself into the second assignment. And we've started marking your first assignment, and so I do have some feedback for you, which will help you, just general feedback for all of you, which will help you develop a better second project. So I thought I'd just concentrate on that first. But you know, before I do that, I just want to make some general comments. This professional project subject is a subject with a large assessment piece at the end. It's 3,000 to 4,000 words, which is larger than you've done for almost all of your assignments so far, I believe, in your degree. And we don't have that long to do it in. You know, depending on when you get going, hopefully right now, you've got around 500 to 600 words a week to do, which is on top of all the other things you have to do, on top of the research and on top of the data analysis, etc., that you're going to have to do for this subject. And you've got a life to live, so don't leave things to the last minute, because I've received quite a lot of extension requests for all sorts of reasons, like flus and sore legs, and ran out of time, etc. But the reality is, you know now when the deadline is, so start planning on that deadline right now. Don't leave it to the last minute, because if you do, you can fall into all sorts of traps of making silly mistakes that cost you little percentages here and there, 1%, 2%, through making, for example, repeating yourself, plagiarizing, bad spelling, bad referencing, simple stuff that has nothing to do with how brainy you are, but just because you're under pressure and trying to do things too quickly. Another general warning is, don't read lots of articles and accumulate lots of information until your head gets all swollen up from all the information that you've read, and then start writing. As soon as you read, I often work with a PDF open that I'm reading, and I've got a Word document open that I'm also writing into, and I might just copy some interesting quotes verbatim. Don't worry about plagiarism, just put quote marks around it and a reference, and make sure you put a page number next to those quote marks as well, just in case you want to quote that person word for word. Of course, if you paraphrase those people and put it in your own words, you still have to put the reference in. So that's a very useful habit, is you write notes, you immediately reference, and do the referencing properly straight away. Saves a lot of time, and if you use something like EndNote, which is quite freely available, it does all the references very nicely for you. That doesn't mean, by the way, with the references, I should make a point, that you shouldn't be checking the reference style, because, for example, if you, like me, you use Google Scholar and you grab your references directly from Google Scholar's full of mistakes in how it references. It's not proper APA style. And it's no excuse to say, well, that was the way it was on Google Scholar. You actually have to, open the article up, read it, of course, check out what the page numbers of the article were, what journal it was, what's the proper spelling of the journal, etc., etc. Anyway, we'll start off with referencing. We do expect that you do it in proper APA style, and I'll just show you a few examples of what students have given me, a few of the articles I've opened up. Now, this one's wrong on many, many counts. Donald is in capitals. Malcolm, which is the person's first name, is looked on as if there's a lot of initials, when in fact it would be better to write Donald with a capital there, small cases there, and just the .m. And that's all correct up to that. 5, strategic marketing planning. I don't know what that 5's doing there. The marketing book, assuming it is a book, should have a capital there and a capital there, and I don't know what this 86 is. If it's a book, it should have a publisher and a place. So there's quite a lot wrong with that. Journal of World Business. This particular student had got the spelling of journal wrong all the time, which meant that I became suspicious. Had they read any of the journal articles? Because they would have noticed that the spelling of this journal and that journal is wrong. But they persistently spelt it this strange way. And also the Here's a direct quote from another student's piece. Understand event summary and success. Margington, M and Suter. This is an in-text reference. Again, lots of little problems here. It shouldn't have initials, and it should have an N there. Otherwise, it's correct. The problem with doing bad referencing is it says several things about the student. First of all, the student is not paying attention to detail. You're doing a data analysis project where the future of your business or the future of your boss's business could depend. If you're not paying attention to detail on this, it may suggest you're not paying attention to detail, full stop. So we also have to ask ourselves, have you actually read what you said you've read? If you haven't even noticed, for example, this was a book, and you're referencing it as if it's a journal, because that's what it looks like here. It looks like a journal. It triggers suspicion on the part of the marker. And you don't want your markers to be suspicious of you, because you want them to trust that you've done a good job. Because we have only maybe 20 or 30 minutes to mark your piece. And if alarm bells start to ring, then we will spend longer on it. And we will poke around and check things, which will mean that if you haven't done a good job, we'll find out more quickly, which is one of the reasons why superficially referencing is not particularly important. But it is a signal of an untidy and a careless and a lazy student. And that's one reason why I always say to students, focus on referencing more than what you realize. Okay. There's good material on the website that includes the CQU referencing guide under, I believe, week 7, but check that. There's also ALC workshops that are still running. You can still make appointments if you get feedback that relates to this. And you'll receive your feedback. I would say marks will be released from the point I record this in about 10 days' time. And so you'll be able to go and have a look at your feedback. And if you've got any major problems, you'll be able to go and deal with it through the ALC workshop systems. Now, this is one of your final subjects at CQU. So as a general warning, we as a university are about to send you off into the world. So we are going to be strict, not just with referencing, but with lots of things, including plagiarism, because we do not want to send you out the door into the world of business without having received the kind of good education that people expect of us. It's our duty to do that. So you need to be more careful than ever in this unit in terms of being scrupulous, being honest, being diligent, and doing a good job. Otherwise, we will catch you at this, and we are paying particular attention in this unit to quality. So the issue for you, of course, as many of you are international students, I myself have a second language, which is Dutch. And if I were asked to produce a report in the Dutch language, having read Dutch journals and having listened to lectures in Dutch, I can imagine how hard that must be. So I do understand that for you as assuming that you're an international student, this is tough stuff. I really do relate to that. And quite a few of your lecturers at CQ come from the same kind of background that you come from. Now, there's a couple of things I want to say about language that will hopefully help you at this stage. Use the inbuilt spell check, of course, but be wary that words in English sometimes can be well spelt, but still the wrong word. And that can produce quite funny results. So if you are using language phonetically, that is how it sounds, and typing it up, you may accidentally find yourself typing the wrong word. But keep things simple. Keep things simple. So, for example, this person wrote this sentence: business processes and project management practices that pertain to organizations are still stored in hard and solid devices such as computers, books. Now, their spelling is fine, except that's American spelling. In English and Australia, that Z should be an S. And you can set the spell check in Word to English as opposed to American spelling. Now, secondly, hard and solid devices. It's best, I think this student is attempting to use plain language, which I think is a good thing, to plainly state what you mean. But it's actually better when you're attempting to be precise about things, is to use the jargon. And I think the jargon in this case, I'm not an IT expert, I think this person is referring to solid state devices such as computers or physical objects such as books. Don't try and be too flashy that pertain to organisations. Try and use plain English and try and use it properly, reasonably properly, and we won't mark you too hard on that, because perfect English, even plenty of people who are brought up in English as a first language are not perfect at it, and I'm sure many of the markers will have experienced and pulled their hair out at certain students who come born in Australia who still can't spell properly and can't use grammar properly. But just keep it simple. I suppose that's my message there. There's fancy words, there's incorrect jargon, and the other point that I want to make is this third point, making big absolute claims. So this person has actually said, if you really read this carefully, business processes and project management practices that pertain to organisations are still stored in hard and solid da-da-da-da-da. Now the reality is, if you think about it, they are, but they're not all stored. So in fact, this person should have said, are usually stored in hard and solid devices, or they should have said in solid state devices such as computers, or physical forms such as computers and books. So be careful. A lot of you have said things in your assignments like, the most important aspect of a business is da 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 da. Whatever you say. And you really need to actually use language that looks a little bit more like one of the most important practices, or Smith 2000 argues that one of the more important practices is. Reference things. If you are going to make a statement without referencing, make sure that statement holds water, as we say in English. And by that I mean, do not claim something that we as a reader can say is absolutely not true. So if some business processes and project management practices are just stored in people's heads, for example. So if you were to say here, and this person hasn't said that business practices are all stored in physical devices, or overwhelmingly stored in physical devices, people could argue with that. So keep your the comments that you make yourself without referencing, so things that you think are logical, make them smaller claims, and inject what we call doubt into your language. Okay, we are going to be strict about plagiarism. As I said before, we have very good antenna to pick up when there is something wrong in a report, and we will be following up on it. Even if you've managed through some tricky method to manage to overcome Turnitin, we still have the capacity to see plagiarism, and we will report that plagiarism. So just be very, very careful there. Okay, secondary data. Many of you still, and I won't go into this before, many of you regarded secondary data as going into the journals and doing a very good job of reading the journals and digesting it and putting it into your paper. You regard that as research. Now, yes, that is research, but we have asked you in this project to analyse secondary data. So neither the CQU library website or Google Scholar is a good way for you to find secondary data. Please go back to the other video that I've shown you on how to find secondary data, and that will assist you in this. But the point of secondary data, just to recap one more time, it is more or less data that has already been processed. It's like tomatoes that have been picked from the field, and put into a sauce, for example, or chilies, and turned into a chili sauce. It is not the chilies. We're not expecting you to go out and get the chilies. We are expecting you to go to a place where the data has been processed and use it for something else. So data, just to be clear, data is a collection of material that can vary on some kind of dimension and that can be sorted and organized. And secondary data is data that has been collected already and has been sorted by some person, some analyst, whether at the Department of Bureau of Statistics or whether it's a scholar who's organized and sorted it and discussed it. But the data, there's a database somewhere that you can still grab and resort into some purpose of your own. So it's using secondary data is a little bit like recycling. So, for example, you grab paper that was used for newspapers and process it again and turn it into a Valentine's card, for example. So, if someone has already cleaned and analysed the data and you simply grab their results of their analysis, then you're not analysing that data yourself. You're actually merely reporting what that person's analysis was. Primary data is when you go and collect the chilies yourself and digest them into a sauce. Secondary data is when you go to a chili factory where the primary data, which is the chilies, has all been collected, and instead of turning them into a sauce, you will grab the chilies that were meant to go into the sauce factory and then you turn them into another kind of dish. So we expect to see you grab a body of data, a bucket of data from somewhere, and repurpose it. You may have to collect that data a little bit, but it's already picked for you. It's picked from the field and it's in some kind of bucket. Basically, the simple way of looking at it is its easiest place to find it is in databases. So you're going to need to find a database. Now, a database can consist of the World Wide Web, for example. And when we say the World Wide Web has thousands and thousands of company websites. So, in fact, it is a database of company websites. There are, search engines on very specific things. So, for example, there can be search engines on images, search engines on word frequencies, search engines that focus on even in Google Scholar, for example, search engines that focus on scholarly journals. If you were to treat Google Scholar, for example, as your database, and you were to do a count of articles that fit a particular search category over a period of time, then you would be using Google Scholar as a database. But if you just go into Google Scholar and search for some suitable articles and write about them, you're not using Google Scholar as a database, you're using it as a library. Now that's the key distinction here. So we're not asking you to read a lot of material and write about it. That's the literature review section or the literature summary section of your report. We are asking you to do that, but that's only part of your report. We're then asking you to find a source of data from one of the existing databases. Grab a bucket of data from that and sort it, analyze it, and discuss it. Now, I hope that point is clear, because I think that's where there's going to be real problems with the second assignment. Now, a lot of you loosely refer to qualitative and quantitative research. And this, to be honest, is a tricky field for you. And in my opinion, if I was, for example, going to go to the Netherlands and study at a Dutch university, I can tell you now, I'm unlikely that I would do, if I was doing this project at a Dutch university, I wouldn't do a qualitative project, because a qualitative project requires you to be like a detective, sorting amongst words and finding hidden meanings and patterns in those words. And frankly, if English is your second language, being a detective in the English language is very tricky. But counting is an international language. Maths is an international language. 1, 2, and 3 is the same in Thailand, not the words, but the counting process as it is in Australia, for example. Now, there's nothing wrong with you doing a search and finding 50 articles or 50 pieces of policies, for example, relating to a particular aspect of business on the internet, on the websites, and then calling that your bucket of data, and then subjecting that to qualitative analysis. You could use that as secondary data for a quantitative analysis as well too. You could simply count the number of times that the term corporate social responsibility was used, as opposed to the amount of times that ethical practices was used. So that would be a quantitative approach. But if you were to do a qualitative approach to a bucket of data that consisted of, let's say, 50 articles or 20 articles or 10 policy documents, for example, 10 pieces of reading material, and you were to do a qualitative analysis of that, that wouldn't mean that you would just read it, reference it, and write about it. If you want to use them as qualitative data, then you have to look into the language and how things are expressed. It's not like a literature review at all. It's an analysis of the hidden meaning behind the author's work. So I'm not saying you shouldn't do it, a qualitative approach, but I'm saying that you should read up on qualitative research in one of the standard introductory textbooks on research methods, and make sure you thoroughly understand what the word qualitative means before you go and do it. The reality is you already do understand what quantitative analysis means, because that's just counting. And then if you want to do a little bit better, and I strongly encourage you to do it, is you can go and do some statistical analysis with stuff that you've counted. And then you've done a quantitative study of secondary data. Doing a qualitative study of secondary data, that's as I say, that's a tricky one. It's a difficult task for you. So I basically sum up there what I've just said. It requires a much higher level of English skill, both the reading analysis and also in the write-up stage. It's not just a simple retelling of what you found. Now, a few minor points that I thought I would get through. The Gantt chart should show how the project is planned throughout the term. I'm not going to be particularly strict in whether you've followed standard Gantt chart procedures. What we're looking for is not just blind. So, for example, if your Gantt chart is just filled in with stuff that you've virtually plagiarized from someone else, that you saw somewhere else, and doesn't seem to relate to how you really process through the project, then that's not a good Gantt chart. Even though it looks beautiful, it's not a good Gantt chart. A Gantt chart is a planning tool, and what we're looking for is evidence that you planned the research project and that the material that you've put into the Gantt chart accurately reflects the kind of processes that you went through in order to do the project. And so I don't care whether the Gantt chart looks like a Gantt chart or not. What I want to see is evidence of an orderly approach to doing the research. It's not a process of copy and paste and just change a few words or add some fancy sounding terms. It's actually about evidencing what you're doing. Many of you have done projects that don't relate to your background. So, for example, I should reverse that. Many of you have done projects that relate to your background before you came to CQU. So, for example, people who had engineering backgrounds are doing engineering projects for this, instead of something relating to the work you've done here at CQU, which presumably, because this is a master's degree and it's your highest degree, presumably, we assume that's what you're going to become. So if you've come here and trained as a human in human resources, we assume that you're leaving engineering behind. You may go work in engineering projects, but you're going to work as a manager in the HR area. Or if you've taken a course in marketing, we assume that as a result of that, you're going to become a marketing person in future, even though back in the day you did a degree in ancient philosophy or something. We don't care. We're assuming that your future career is marketing. Now, we've made this quite clear on the Moodle side, but many of you have ignored this. And I think this is an issue, particularly if you've simply gone and recycled one of your old assignments or one of your old projects and turned it into a professional project for this. Remember, the name of this course or this unit is professional project. So it relates to a profession, your current profession. Now you can stretch that, as we've said on the Moodle side, and say, okay, look, my general area is marketing. I'm not going to do it specifically about the profession of marketing, but I'm going to do something that's crucially important to the profession of marketing. You can get away with that. We will accept that. But if you have clearly violated that and produced an article or a project that's an engineering project or chemistry project in terms of a professional project, then you are going to fail this unit, and you need to rectify that in your second assignment. Now, just finally, I mean, I sound a little bit strict in this talk, and I don't want to come across as being particularly a mean headmaster, but we do want you to succeed in this project. And we want you to succeed when you get out into the real world. And the things that we are picking at in this course are the kind of things that bosses out in the real world are also going to focus on. Things like attention to detail, things like getting jobs done on time. So getting an extension, if it's genuinely needed, that's fine. But getting extensions every single time you do a course because you're bad at planning time, or you take on more than you know how to complete on time, you're bad at judging these things. That's not something that bosses will find appealing. When you ignore things like you produce a project about engineering when we've clearly asked you to produce a project, a professional project about your future profession, that's crucially important to your future profession, then you're not listening to what we say. And we're acting as your quasi-bosses here in this instance. So that's something that will be a problem to bosses. If you are not sure about something and you don't ask for clarification and just go ahead and do something wildly and then afterwards say, oh, well, I didn't understand completely, a boss wouldn't want to hear that. A boss would rather you asked. If you're not clear about something, don't just guess, ask for clarification. Now, the whole idea of referencing is about attributing ideas to the proper source. Imagine if you were at work and one of your colleagues came up with a really good idea and you claimed it as your own. It would create a very bad workplace environment very quickly. So attributing ideas honestly to where you actually got them from, that's a good thing. It's something that bosses will approve of. And this whole idea of stealing other people's ideas, of course, is not something that bosses will find very appealing. And finally, any evidence you can show in your assignment that demonstrates that you've tried really hard, that you've worked hard, you've put a lot of work into it, you've put quite a lot of thought into it, that's going to be rewarded. And evidence that shows laziness, trying to do things quickly, not really thinking about it, that's stuff that we can pick up. We're good at this, we're experienced at this, so we can pick up if there's a problem here, and we will mark that kind of thing down. So just keep in mind, we're on your side, we're trying to get you through this, and we don't expect you to be perfect, we don't expect you to be a genius, we just expect you to treat this like a job that you want. I suppose that's a good way of putting it. Treat this professionally, try, be honest, and read carefully, do the best you can, and you'll do okay at this course, I'm sure. Okay, thanks for listening.